Welcome to English Story Vault. Get ready, everyone, because this story will take you on an exciting adventure. Let the story begin. This book describes a major dispute in the United States. The state of California initiated legal action against President Donald Trump, a surprising move. The situation arose from President Trump's decision regarding the National Guard. He ordered federal troops and National Guard members to deploy to Los Angeles during ongoing protests in the city. California's leadership opposed this decision. Governor Newsom and Attorney General Bonta, representing the state, declared President Trump's action illegal. They characterized it as an unlawful appropriation of their state's military force. They argued President Trump lacked the authority to do this without state government approval. Typically, states maintain control over their National Guard. The central issue in this narrative is power, a clash between presidential authority and states' rights. California contended that President Trump overstepped his authority. They claimed he violated established regulations. Federal troops arrived in Los Angeles as a result of President Trump's order, escalating tensions. California officials sought a federal court injunction to halt the deployment, requesting the troops' withdrawal. This lawsuit forms the core event of the story. It highlights a significant confrontation between a state and the president. This account will detail the reasons for this conflict, the events surrounding the protests, and the legal framework governing authority in such circumstances. It provides a crucial examination of a power and legal dispute in America. The origin of the conflict was immigration. Federal officers conducted extensive immigration raids in Los Angeles, targeting workplaces and residences. These raids sparked widespread anger, leading to protests in Los Angeles. Demonstrators gathered at a facility holding individuals apprehended in the raids. The protests rapidly expanded, drawing an increasing number of participants. The demonstrations were not peaceful. The scene was chaotic and dangerous, with street fires, burning cars, and pervasive smoke. Clashes occurred between protesters and officers, with police deploying measures like tear gas to manage the crowds. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass commented on the raids. She expressed sorrow and concern, anticipating community outrage. She stated these raids were unnecessary. She had also hoped soldiers would not be deployed, anticipating this before any troops arrived. On Saturday, President Donald Trump made a decision. He announced his intent to federalize 2,000 California National Guard soldiers. The National Guard, typically a state-controlled military force under the governor, can sometimes be federalized by the president. President Trump justified sending these soldiers to Los Angeles as a necessary measure to quell the disturbances. He asserted it was essential due to a rebellion or the threat of one, compelling his intervention. He claimed that without his involvement, Los Angeles would have been completely destroyed. Consequently, President Trump exercised his authority, stating a need to restore law and order. By Sunday night, California National Guard soldiers arrived in Los Angeles, accompanied by Marine Corps helicopters. Federal forces were now present in the city, responding to protests ignited by the immigration raids. California opposed President Trump's action and decided to challenge it in court. California's governor and attorney general filed a lawsuit. They sued President Trump and the government, a very significant legal maneuver. California argued that President Trump's troop deployment order was illegal. They also asserted it violated the U.S. Constitution. California contended the president exceeded his authority. They cited Title 10 of the U.S. Code, which pertains to military use. California also referenced the Insurrection Act, a law that permits the president to use domestic troops in specific circumstances. However, California maintained that President Trump failed to adhere to the regulations of these laws. A primary reason for California's lawsuit was the president's failure to consult the governor first. Ordinarily, the state's National Guard operates under the governor's command. If the president wishes to deploy them for federal purposes, the governor's permission is typically required. California asserted President Trump did not obtain this permission. The lawsuit alleged that President Trump simply seized control of the state's soldiers. California labeled this an illegal takeover. They argued that the protests in Los Angeles were not severe enough to meet the legal definition of an insurrection. The state maintained the situation did not necessitate unilateral presidential action without the governor's consent. California sought assistance from the federal court, requesting an injunction. An injunction is a court order to cease an action. California desired a court order for the president to stop deploying troops and using the state's National Guard. They wanted the court to declare the president's order unlawful. Thus, the lawsuit was California's declaration that the president overstepped his bounds. They utilized legal arguments to contend he lacked the right to federalize their National Guard and deploy them within the state in this manner. 4. California's stance Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta strongly articulated California's reasons for suing President Donald Trump. They held a press conference on June 9th to publicly announce their legal action. They asserted that the president's order to deploy federal troops and National Guard members was detrimental to California. Attorney General Bonta stated the federal troop order was entirely unneeded. He claimed it exacerbated violence in the streets rather than helping the situation. Mr. Bonta stated, "The president is trying to make problems and chaos in our state for his own political reasons." He emphasized that this was done despite the governor and local police leadership's opposition. Mr. Bonta promised they would. Governor Newsom used very strong language. He characterized the entire situation as a manufactured crisis, implying he believed the president intentionally created the problem rather than it being a genuine emergency. Governor Newsom accused Mr. Trump of deliberately causing chaos. He also stated the president was terrorizing communities and hurting the principles of our great democracy. Governor Newsom declared that sending the National Guard in this manner constituted an autocratic action. This implies it was an individual wielding excessive power, attempting to control people without their consent. Governor Newsom vowed, "We will not let this stand." He reminded the public of his past legal confrontations with the Trump administration on issues like environmental regulations. He viewed this as another battle to safeguard Californians from federal overreach. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass also shared her sentiments. She expressed significant dissatisfaction and frustration regarding the federal actions in her city. Mayor Bass, a Democrat, had previously requested the federal government to avoid using excessive force in Los Angeles. Mayor Bass unequivocally stated, none of this needed to happen. She believed that the federal immigration raids unnecessarily instilled fear and problems for residents. She pointed out that Los Angeles had been largely peaceful before these raids commenced. She felt that federal government decisions had caused the recent unrest. Other state officials and local government leaders concurred with Mayor Bass. They stated California was compelled to manage a difficult situation it did not create. Several legal scholars and civil rights organizations also commented on the lawsuit. Civil rights groups cautioned about limitations on the domestic use of federal troops. They argued that such troop deployments could erode public trust in government and the military. Legal experts also expressed support for California's legal action. Many Democratic politicians endorsed California's stance, viewing it as state protection. Conversely, some Republican politicians accused California of political opportunism, claiming the state disregarded national security. The leaders of California stated that litigation was their final recourse. They asserted they had to act to uphold the law and ensure citizen safety. They claimed their motivation was rooted in legality and righteousness, not politics. They sought adherence to correct rules and procedures for federal force deployment within California. Trump's response: President Donald Trump addressed the deployment of soldiers to Los Angeles, emphasizing its importance for law and order. He stated the city required assistance due to the protests. President Trump believed the protests were excessively large and dangerous. He attributed the failure to control the unrest to California leaders, including Governor Newsom. President Trump utilized social media to comment on the situation. He posted strong condemnations of the protesters and Governor Newsom. President Trump warned that violent protesters would face a strong response from soldiers. He even suggested Governor Newsom should be arrested for opposing the troop deployment. The White House and the Pentagon, the military's central office, supported President Trump's action. They asserted the president possessed the legal authority to deploy troops. They cited the Insurrection Act, which allows the president to use the military in specific situations, such as a rebellion, to maintain order. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also deemed the deployment necessary. The government argued that the situation in Los Angeles was extremely grave. They characterized the protests as akin to a rebellion, or potentially escalating into one. They contended that the law empowered the president to act to safeguard individuals and mitigate danger. However, some raised questions about the legal justifications. California leaders argued the president bypassed standard protocols, which often require state governor consent. They also challenged whether the protest genuinely constituted an insurrection, as defined by law. They contended the situation did not meet the high threshold required to invoke the Insurrection Act without the governor's permission. The Trump administration remained confident in the legality and necessity of their action. They asserted it was essential to save Los Angeles and uphold national laws. This constituted the president's rejoinder to California's lawsuit. Laws are crucial documents dictating permissible actions. When the government employs the Army or National Guard domestically, specific laws must be adhered to. Two primary statutes are Title 10 of the U.S. Code and the Insurrection Act. The National Guard is unique, comprising soldiers residing in each state. Typically, the state governor serves as their commander, sometimes referred to as Title 32 status. Under this status, the Guard aids the state, for instance, during natural disasters. However, the president can federalize the National Guard, known as Title 10 status. When under Title 10, the president commands them, not the governor. Ordinarily, to shift the Guard from state control, Title 32, to federal control, Title 10, the president requires the state governor's agreement. This is a very important rule. An old law from 1807, the Insurrection Act, serves as an exception to the usual rule. It permits the president to deploy the Army and federalized National Guard within the United States, even without gubernatorial consent. This is reserved for extremely serious situations. For example, a major rebellion against the government or if state forces are unable to enforce federal laws. This law grants the president power during crises, but it is rarely invoked. Another important law is the Posse Comitatus Act. This law prohibits the regular federal army from acting as domestic police. It prevents soldiers from making arrests or policing crime in cities. The Insurrection Act is one of the few instances where the military can perform police-like functions, but only under specific conditions. The Insurrection Act has been invoked historically. Presidents have used it to quell major disturbances or ensure the enforcement of critical federal laws in states, sometimes against state opposition. This demonstrates the law's application during difficult periods. This situation also involves significant legal principles. One is states' rights concerning the balance of power between states and the federal government. Control over the National Guard is part of this concept. Another principle is the separation of powers, meaning the distinct roles of the president, Congress, and the courts. This case raises the question of which governmental branch determines how and when to deploy soldiers domestically. These laws and legal principles are crucial for understanding the current events. They establish the rules for using military power within the country. The dispute between California and President Trump was not unprecedented. They had previously disagreed on various matters, including environmental regulations and trade. This time, the disagreement centered on soldiers within the state. Strong opinions surrounded this situation, often aligning with political affiliations. Supporters of the Republican Party often sided with President Trump. They believed his deployment of aid was justified for safety. They argued California leaders failed to control the protests effectively, and the city needed assistance. For them, it was about maintaining law and order. Democratic Party supporters generally backed California. They believed the president should not use state soldiers without state permission. They deemed it wrong and indicative of presidential overreach. They felt California was defending citizens' rights and adhering to regulations. Many people nationwide also held opinions. Some expressed concern at the sight of soldiers in the streets, viewing it as detrimental to a free country. Civil rights advocacy groups agreed with California, asserting that deploying soldiers could harm people. Others believed the president acted appropriately, convinced the protests were dangerous and strong action was needed to prevent further trouble. Public opinion was divided, reflecting varying American sentiments on these issues. News reports and legal political analysts extensively discussed the situation. Their perspectives often mirrored the same division. Some argued the president had the power he exercised. Others contended he did not, and his action was unusual. Both sides accused the other of politically motivated actions. California leaders claimed President Trump desired or exaggerated the trouble for political gain. They asserted he exploited the situation for personal benefit. President Trump and his allies claimed California leaders were simply opposing him due to party differences. They argued California was impeding his duties solely to discredit him. Some individuals examined historical precedents. They discussed past instances of National Guard deployment domestically, perhaps during prior protests, considering similarities and differences. This situation felt significant because it involved a state government litigating against the president over military command. It demonstrated how divergent ideas about governmental power and states' rights can ignite major arguments. This disagreement transcended purely legal matters. It also involved politics and national perceptions. This court case holds immense significance for the future. It will help determine the extent of presidential power. It will also help define the power of states, such as California. If California prevails, it could limit the president's ability to easily deploy the military within a state. It could place constraints on presidential authority in certain situations. This would grant states greater autonomy over internal affairs, particularly concerning their National Guard. However, if California loses, presidential power could expand. This might enable a president to deploy federal troops into a state more readily, even without the state governor's consent. This could alter how the government uses the military domestically. This case also touches upon fundamental national ideals, democracy and civil liberties. Civil liberties are basic human rights such as freedom of speech or assembly. Some fear that using soldiers against citizens could infringe upon these rights. The case originated from immigration actions, illustrating ongoing disagreements between states and the national government regarding operational methods. This could hinder future cooperation, especially on issues like immigration or significant state-level problems. The legal battle is ongoing. The court must hear both sides. Governor Newsom and Attorney General Bonta filed the lawsuit for California. President Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth are defending their actions. The court will render a decision. After the initial court ruling, the losing party might appeal to a higher court, which could be a lengthy process. The case might even reach the nation's highest court, the Supreme Court. Regardless of the outcome, this case demonstrates persistent, significant disagreements over power in the United States. These conflicts between states and the national government are likely to continue. The result of this lawsuit will help shape the nation's functioning in the years to come. It is a historic struggle between a state and a president over the right to command soldiers on American streets. What do you think is the most important question this case will answer? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. Have a wonderful day.